Okay, good afternoon. Today I want to talk about my work history since I ended my career, since I finished my career as a single, as a mainframe IT person, sort of an individual contributor, because that's pertinent to things I'm going to talk about later in later videos. So I'll just start out with a couple of pictures. That was the home I was in. That was the house I was in until 2017. I inherited it's a living room near the fireplace about 10 years ago at Christmas time. And that's my parents. And that's Minneapolis downtown from the Churchill Apartments back probably in 2000 and early winter of 2003, probably. And let me go on then with, first of all, by saying that the first thing I wanted to do in when I was laid off with a severance and retirement package and everything, was try to have another job as an individual contributor, maybe as a contractor for one of these staffing companies, and keep my outside activity, my book and my online activity separate. But you can imagine that could be difficult, and that we don't know whether that really interfered with any of the interviews I had. I actually had three big interviews. One of them was on September 11th, 2002, on at a company, Express Scripts, on the Bloomington Strip on 494. Almost didn't quite get that job. Looked like it wasn't authorized or something. And another one by phone from a recruiter who had contacted me in August of 2002. Well, I had started a course at Hennepin County Tech. And they didn't contact me again until November, and then the interview just didn't go very well because I had moved on to other things. And then January 2003, I had an interview with Group One, which had become Pitney Bowes, that had serviced Reliastar where I worked on. I was very frank about them that there had been problem with how they got along with the company, and I never heard from them again. I don't know what the reason was, but it might have been it. But after the layoff, I took some time off, but then the first little job I got was it was as a basically a telephone solicitor or telemarketer um, for the Minnesota Orchestra for the Young People's Concert. So it was a specific part of the specific part of the Minnesota Orchestra. I actually was there 14 months in a part-time job, making about, and getting contributions right after shortly after 9/11, actually, and actually did decently at it. Didn't make very much, but it gave me some stability and everything. I had an interview, and then I had an interview with an offshoot of Citibank. I think it was called Prime Vest, but the whole idea was that you would call people and convert them from whole life from whole life insurance to to term, because they could save money that way. Because at the time there was a theory that whole life wasn't really paying particularly well, and it wasn't actually worth doing. And it was a reasonable theory, but you had to be very aggressive and call people, and you had to go along with, a sort of always be closing type of attitude, like in that movie 100 Mile Rule. You may remember that comedy movie. So I didn't do that. And then I worked as a debt collector. I worked as a debt collector. Um, now this I worked as a debt collector for a company called RMA, and for a company called RMA in the summer of 2003 before I came back. And I also would volunteer. a few evenings for at the Metrodome for some charity for and work a whole day for sporting events. One was a baseball game, one was a pro football game, and one was and um, one one was a rodeo type of event. And then I moved back for Virginia in September of 2003. And the first job I had was actually selling subscriptions to the National Symphony Orchestra, which was different from the Minnesota Orchestra in that it involved actually selling symphony subscriptions rather than a specific charity program, which had been the young people's concerts. And then there was a problem in December of 2003. Somebody I called made a threat. And so I decided that we were behaving illegally because I called him after 9, which we were doing. And I decided not to stay there when that happened. Um, and so by this time I was living, I had come back, I was living with mother, and she had had the coronary bypass surgery in 1999. I've talked about that before. And she um, was still doing pretty well until about 2007, but I didn't really know that. So I got something. I got a contract to write a business ethics multiple choice test for a company called Brainbench. So I actually got paid for writing something in early 2003. That was actually a very positive experience. I really liked the questions I came up with. I stored them in Microsoft Access, and I lost the database. I don't own it, so I wouldn't be able to show it to you now, but it was an interesting thing to do that. And then, I started getting other interviews. There was a debt collection company in Rockville, Maryland, where you were going to, if you went, uh, if you worked there, you were going to supervise 2 or 3 other collectors. That was the idea in actually collecting bills. Whereas the other one I had called the people myself. Then I've talked about the substitute teaching in another recent video, December 15th, that was. And I also graded papers in the middle of, from special education students in math. I graded some papers. I considered the idea of doing home customer service from a few companies. One of them was Alpine Access. There were 2 other companies, and you dial in, and they have to sort of have control of your computer and everything, and you work a shift, a certain number of hours a day from home on your own computer, and it has to be secured in a certain way and so forth. I never really did that. It was something I thought about. I took the United States when I was subbing in the fall of 2004. I took the United States Postal Service test and passed it. I didn't. I almost got that job. I was having a lot of dental problems at the time, but we couldn't get my medical records back from a fall I had from a hip fracture in Minnesota, because otherwise, I might have done that. It was much more 17. It was like $17 or $18 an hour then, and you have to case the mail. It's a very regimented job, and that would have been a very severe test of my character or something. I got contacted by life insurance companies, New York Life and Humanity, just like Citibank before, to sell insurance, to become a life insurance agent and financial planner. That was an idea. Then I was contacted by HR Block in 2008. Did I want to become a tax preparer? And that was kind of an interesting thing. That might be something I should have considered. Then in early 2009, I got a totally unsolicited call for a job to supervise teenagers raising money in a shopping mall for charities. That sounded very odd. Um, but finally, in 2010, which was the last year of my mother's life, and when I was still living with her at home, I did go to work census taker for, that's the Department of Commerce, for the biennial census in 2010. And then I got another job with the current population survey for 2011, which I started right after she passed away. I started in January of 2011. And the first day, the first month of my being, after her passing and my being on my own, living in the house, was to take a business trip to Charlotte to get the training. That was interesting. Um, and then I've also worked several elections, which is a 16-hour day, and which is a 16-hour day for uh, you get there at 5 in the morning and you have to work in Virginia. It's the polls are open for 13 hours. And generally it takes till about 9 o'clock to close everything and get it turned in. And I actually was took the support for tech support in one of them when they had a Windows system for the elections back in the middle 2000s. Later on, they went to a strictly manual system, or where all the votes are cast on paper and put into a machine, which is thought to be much more secure. And I'm not going to get into the debate over election security right here, but all my own experience was that it was perfectly secure, and there wasn't any way anybody could really tamper with it. I will say that as perhaps a countervailing view to some things you've heard from one of our political parties. It seemed to be perfectly well run, but it's a very tiring day and very taxing. And I think the whole point of all this is, I did inherit the house, or the trust did. The trust technically owns the house. I think I've talked about some of this before. But I did sort of get off easy compared to a lot of other people. I didn't have to prove that I could hold down a manual, a job that was regimented and keep it for 10 years the way a lot of real working people do. And I think that's kind of an issue that has to do even with my own personal credibility. And you could say that that's a social credit issue if you wanted. The left hasn't done that. The left instead has gone down the path of paying attention to which classes of people, what race and gender ID or sexual orientation, all this and that you are, and are you from an oppressor class or are you oppressed? And if you're an oppressor, you have no right to anything. Um, Now, China, there's a lot of talk about social credit systems in China, and there are videos online right now that present conflicting views of how far that's actually got. Excuse me. Um, so, um, but that would be a way to judge who should be online and who should be listened to, and even who could be allowed to have an account if you really wanted to limit speech. Excuse me. My voice is, if you really wanted to limit speech. Um, and that's the danger of Project 2025. This idea that they're talking about that all LGBTQ content is porn. Well, really, it's mostly the trans issues. But it does loop back to what's taught in schools and why, after we got gay marriage, for example, in the courts, that it was you needed to have kids learn about it, had to know about it, because some teachers could be in that situation. So the more radical elements of the left came into the schools and took this as an opportunity to present a different way of looking at the LGBTQ thing and making more about gender identity than personal choices and sexual orientation and personal responsibility to make it more about identity politics, and that's another discussion. But this project 2025 could eventually make all of that speech online, or try to make it illegal, and meaning that I wouldn't be able to keep the channels like this open. Or you could have a very strict, try to have a very strict system of IDing everybody who goes online to any website at all, not just social media. That would be a possibility. Maybe you could do that with the blockchain. Maybe we could define a whole system of the blockchain, but is that a good idea? I don't know. But those are thoughts that I've been thinking about, and I've posted several videos about the protest recently about the project 2025, and I think some of the things that are being said are be taken seriously. But I think I showed you the there is a blog post. There is a blog post about it online. There is a blog, yeah, there is a blog post about my work history. I'll give you the link to that, and you can read in more detail what my concerns are there. It's on the older blog that's more personal and more detailed of my specific situation than the policy is. And so um, that is what I have today. And I do thank you for will say that I do thank you for listening.